Welcome to the deep dive. So, you've probably seen the headlines, right? All these accusations flying around, certain countries supposedly undermining sanctions, trading heavily with nations like Russia or Iran.
Hmm.
And you see these massive trade volumes reported, the total dollar amounts. It can feel a bit much.
It really can. You look at those big numbers and it's easy to jump to conclusion.
Exactly. You think, wow, that's a lot of money flowing. But,
Huh.
okay, let's just pause and unpack this for a second. What if the way we're looking at those big numbers, those total volumes, is actually, well, fundamentally misleading?
That is precisely the question. And it's the core of some really fascinating research by Dr. Ryan Baidya that we're digging into today.
Okay.
His work basically challenges that whole traditional method,
Mm-hmm.
assessing trade with sanctioned nations just based on the overall import volume.
Right, the headline number.
Exactly. So our mission here in this deep dive is really to explore why switching to a per capita view, looking at imports per person, might give us a much fairer, much more accurate picture, and how that perspective shift could really change how you understand global trade and, well, diplomacy.
Okay, so thinking back to those news reports, they always hammer on the sheer dollar value, right? The total amount.
Yeah.
And I mean, numerically, the totals are correct, aren't they?
They are technically, the math adds up on the total volume.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit counterintuitive at first.
Uh-huh.
It's like we're looking at this huge pie, maybe, but we're completely forgetting to ask how many people are actually supposed to be sharing it.
Okay. I see where you're going.
And that's the fundamental misunderstanding, really. Goods and services, I mean, ultimately, they're consumed by people,
Yeah.
not by, square miles of land or some abstract political entity.
Right. It's individuals buying things.
Precisely. So it just makes sense, doesn't it? A country with a massive population, say over 1 billion people, will naturally have a much higher aggregate demand. Just more mouths to feed, more needs to meet,
Okay.
which leads to bigger total import figures, even if the amount each individual person consumes is actually, well, pretty modest.
It's like saying a huge city uses more water in total than a tiny village. Of course it does.
Exactly. The total is bigger, but per person. Maybe the village uses way more water per individual. It's the same logic.
That makes perfect sense when you put it that way. And Dr. Baidya had this hypothetical example, didn't he? To make it super clear, I remember reading that. How does it work again?
Yeah, it's a great illustration. It really hammers the point home. So imagine you have country A. It's got, say, 10 million people,
Okay.
and it imports $100 million worth of goods from a sanctioned nation. If you do the math, that works out to $10 per person.
Right, $10 per capita.
Now, compare that to country B. Country B is huge. It has 1 billion people,
Mm-hmm.
and it also imports $100 million from that same sanctioned nation.
Okay, same total amount.
Same total. But for country B, that $100 million spread across 1 billion people, it's just $0.10 per person. 10 cents.
Wow. Okay, so judging country B more harshly just because the total is the same $100 million, that seems absurd when you put it like that.
Completely. Because country A's citizens are actually consuming, on an individual level, 100 times more of those sanctioned goods per person.
100 times. That really makes you scratch your head about the usual way these things are reported. So, okay, that hypothetical example makes the problem crystal clear. But does this actually hold up when we look at real-world trade data? Let's talk about Russia. Dr. Bage's analysis of their exports. You said it was eye-opening.
It absolutely is. When you look at the numbers for Russia's exports, say, for the first half of 2025, and adjust for population, the story looks very different.
Okay, let's hear it.
Right. So take India,
Yeah.
massive population, right? Roughly 1.46 billion people. Their total imports from Russia in that period were somewhere between $25 and $26 billion.
A huge number.
A huge total number, yes. But divide that by the population, and you get a per capita import figure of about $17.10 per person.
$17. Okay, what about others, like the EU?
Right. The EU population around 450 million. Their total imports from Russia were much lower, between 6.5 and 7.7 billion dollars.
Okay.
But their per capita imports, they actually range from about $14.70 up to $17.10.
Wait, so India's $17.10 per person is basically the same, maybe even a bit lower than the top end of the EU's range.
Exactly. That's the key finding. Despite India's total trade figure looking way, way bigger, that's almost entirely down to its massive population. Per person, their import level is right there with the EU's. It completely reshapes the picture painted by just looking at totals.
That's fascinating. The scale difference really does change everything. And I think Dr. Baidya also had data for the full previous year, right, for 2024. Does that reinforce the point?
It does, and perhaps even more starkly, when we look at the full fiscal year 2024 data, the per capita contrasts are really something.
Okay, what did that show?
So for 2024, India's per capita import from Russia is about $45.20.
$45. Got it.
The EU as a whole was significantly higher at $97.30 per capita.
Wow. More than double India's per capita level.
Right. The U.S. was quite low, only $8.60 per capita. But here's where it gets really, really interesting. Look at Turkey. Much smaller population than India or the EU.
Uh-huh.
Their per capita import from Russia was an estimated, get this, around $412.80.
Whoa. Over $400 per person.
Yes. And Serbia, another country with a relatively smaller population, using 2023 data Dr. Baidya cited, was around $242.90 per capita.
Okay, so countries like Turkey and Serbia, their total trade might not make the biggest headlines compared to India.
Exactly.
But per person, their exposure, their consumption of Russian goods is dramatically higher.
Dramatically. And this data really flies in the face of the narrative that, India is somehow disproportionately funding Russia. Because on a per-person basis, individuals in India are consuming far less than individuals in many other nations, including parts of Europe.
That really does reframe the discussion around Russia. But is this pattern unique to Russia? Or does this same logic, this population-adjusted view, apply elsewhere? What about, say, Iran, another country under heavy sanctions?
It's a great question. And yes, Dr. Baidya's work suggests very similar pattern emerges when you look at Iran's export data using the same per capita lens. Let's look at fiscal year 2024-2025 data he compiled.
Okay.
So the European Union, again, 450 million people, total exports from Iran to the EU were about $899.6 million.
Right.
That works out to exactly $2 per capita for the EU population.
$2 per person. Okay, India.
India, population 1.438 billion. Total exports from Iran were higher in volume, about $1.97 billion.
Higher total rate.
Higher total, yes.
Yeah.
But per capita, it comes out to just $1.37 per person.
So India's per capita import from Iran is actually lower than the EU's.
That's right, lower than the EU's $2. And then look at Turkey again, population 84.1 million. Their imports from Iran totaled $2.45 billion.
Higher total than India or the EU, even with a smaller population.
Correct. And that translates to a per capita import from Iran of $29.16.
$29 compared to $2 for the EU and less than that for India. That's a huge difference.
It's massive. And the U.S., just for comparison, population 335 million, imported only $6.3 million total from Iran, which is basically negligible per capita, about 0.01 teens, less than 2 cents per person.
So interpreting those numbers, yeah, at first glance, Iran's total exports to India looks significant, but per person, it tells a completely different story. India is actually lower than the EU, and both are dwarfed by Turkey.
Precisely. The exact same pattern we saw with Russia holds true. Focusing only on the total volume gives you a skewed picture. Adjusting for population reveals a very different reality of per-person economic engagement.
So, okay, bringing this all together, what does this actually mean for all those accusations we started with? The ones about certain countries, often large ones like India, undermining sanctions. It sounds like maybe we're pointing fingers in the wrong direction, or at least misunderstanding the scale.
I think that's a fair assessment based on this analysis. It suggests that blaming countries, particularly very populous ones like India, for their trade volumes often completely ignores this vital demographic context. The sheer scale of their population drives the totals up.
Right.
And this raises a really important question, doesn't it? How can international policy, how can diplomacy be truly informed and, frankly, fair if we're not using the right yardstick to measure things?
Yeah, if the measurement itself is flawed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Adopting a per capita metric for assessing trade related to sanctions compliance could bring, well, a lot more consistency and credibility to the whole field of international economic diplomacy.
So what would be the specific benefits, then, of shifting to this per capita view?
Well, Dr. Baidya's work points to several clear advantages. First, and maybe most obviously, is fairness and equity.
Okay.
It ensures nations with huge populations aren't unfairly penalized just because they have more people needing basic goods. It aligns the assessment with actual individual consumption patterns.
Makes sense. What else? Second, accuracy of impact. It gives a much more precise measure of how much benefit a sanctioned economy is actually deriving on a per-person basis from trade with a specific country. It tells you where the real economic reliance might be per citizen.
Right, not just a big abstract number.
Third, reduced misinformation. It would directly counter those misleading narratives that grab headlines but lack context. Using per capita figures helps avoid unnecessarily straining international relations based on, well, bad data interpretation.
Which seems crucial for cooperation.
Absolutely. And finally, fourth, informed policymaking. Policymakers could make much smarter decisions. They could see where the actual per capita consumption of sanctioned goods is genuinely high and maybe focus efforts there, rather than just reacting to the biggest total trade volumes, which we've seen can be quite deceptive.
So wrapping this up then, the core argument, the big takeaway here seems pretty clear. It really is time we reframe how we talk about and measure trade under sanctions.
It's not about abstract land masses or political blocs importing things. It's about goods being imported to serve the needs of individual people. It's about per-person consumption.
That's the essence of it. And if the international community genuinely seeks consistency, if it seeks credibility in its economic diplomacy, then these per capita comparisons really have to move from the sidelines to center stage.
It seems like a much fairer way to look at it.
It offers a fairer and arguably more accurate reflection of a nation's economic engagement, especially for these hugely populous countries, where the aggregate figures can so easily mask what's happening on an individual level.
Right.
So the question really isn't about whether the data exists anymore. Dr. Baidya's work, and others like it, clearly show it does. The real question is, will the international community continue to judge global trade through this kind of blurry lens of blind aggregates? Or will it choose a path based on fairness, rooted in, well, economic truth? It makes you wonder what really stands out to you from this deep dive.